Hi guys, welcome back. So here's an example of our simple project. For example, you have an app where a client requires you to build a database backup feature, where they can generate a backup and download it themselves. So when I click the backup button, the backup process will be sent to the queue job, so it can be processed in the background since this is a long-running process. And after the backup is complete, it will notify us in real time that the backup process is complete without us reloading the page. We are going to use Laravel Reverb for the real-time notification, and the backup file will also be listed right here. And by the way, the notification system will be available on all pages. So even if you're on a different page, the notification system will still work. So for example, if I hit the backup button again, if I go to the dashboard, for example, we will still receive the notification. Now, if we take a look at our storage directory, here are the two backup files we created earlier. And of course, you can extract the SQL file as usual. You can also download the backup files individually here. So when you hit the download button, it will just simply download the backup file right here. And you can also delete the backup files. And if we check our storage directory again, the backups are no longer there. Okay, good. So let's get started. Okay, first let's create the backup controller via the artisan command. After this, create the backup function and add some comments. Then in the web.php file, let's define the backup route. Next, in the front end, we need to call this route when we hit the backup button. And by the way, the source code is linked in the video description if you want to test this out. I have already created this React component to save us some time, and I assume that you already know at least some basics of Laravel and React. But if you are using Vue or other front-end frameworks, the concepts will still apply to you. You only have to do the equivalent of this on your front-end framework of choice. So this component represents this part of the user interface. This is a simple React component that will hold the list of our backups. Okay, right now there's nothing here. Okay, back to the code. I've already created some states here that will hold the list of backups. As you can see, this is an array and a Boolean state that will determine if the backup process is in progress. Now, in the backup function, set the isBackingUp state to true to indicate that the backup process has begun. Then, perform the HTTP request to the backup endpoint. After a successful response, set the isBackingUp state again to false and include the catch method here. Now the next step is to write the code for the actual database backup process. For this, I will put this in a trait so this code can be reused in other classes as well, because later we will put our backup process in a queue job, and we will call our backup method there. So I will create a concerns directory under the app directory and name the trait backupdatabase.php. Okay, don't forget the namespace, and let's say trait backup database. Now I will declare a backup function as protected instead of public. By making the method protected, you ensure that the method can only be called from within the class itself or from classes that extend this class. So let's supply an argument here, which is the ID of the user who performs the backup, since we are going to record who initiated the backup. Now in this method, let's wrap our backup process in the try-catch block. And in the catch block, this is an exception. So this is going to be the PHP script that will back up the database and stream the backup directly to a gzip file to make the backup process efficient. So next, let's start writing the logic for the backup process. Now, using some video editing techniques, I'm just going to cut some portions so you don't get bored watching me type all of the code that you see here. So the code that you see here is our database credentials. We need to supply this to the MySQL dump command that we will write in a minute. As you can see, I'm pulling all of the credentials in the config files. You also have an option to use just the environment variables like this, but I highly discourage you from using this method because when you deploy your code to production and cache your configuration files, this env function will all return null. So be careful when using the env function anywhere in your codebase. Next, we are going to specify the file name of the gzip file containing the database backup. So what I did here is just take the database variable, include the backup string in between the underscores, and concatenate an 8-character random string to make it unique and add the .sql.gz string at the end. I will also declare here where our backup is going to be stored. So I just use the default storage disk of Laravel for now. So if you're using AWS S3 or some other cloud storage provider, you can also do so. And of course, don't forget to import the string class here. Now before we dump the database to the gzip file, we want to record who initiated the backup. So for this, I'm going to call the create method of the database backup model to persist the user ID and the gzip path to the database before the backup. Okay, so after this, here's the actual MySQL dump command that will directly stream the database to the gzip file without saving the SQL file temporarily on the disk. Streaming the database backup into gzip directly will save disk space and is more memory efficient. So in this command, first you need to specify the absolute path of where the MySQL dump executable is located. Since every machine is configured differently, this location might be different for you. Then, we just need to specify the username, password, host, and the port of our database configuration. Now, we also have a couple of options here we specified in our dump command, such as the single transaction option, which is effective when used with InnoDB tables that supports transactions. For these tables, it ensures a consistent snapshot of the data without requiring table locks and has minimal impact on database operations. We also use the quick option, which optimizes the process of dumping large databases by reducing memory usage. The lock table option is set to false to prevent the database from being locked, allowing other operations to continue uninterrupted, which is crucial in production environments. And then we just need to specify the database and stream it directly into a gzip file and save it according to the location we set earlier. And then we will execute this dump command using PHP's exec function. The exec function accepts the command to run as the first argument, while the output and result are optional arguments. The output captures the standard output of the command. Each line of output from the command is stored as an element in this array, while the result captures the exit status code of the command. This is a system-dependent value, but by convention, 0 means the command executed successfully, while a non-zero output indicates an error has occurred. So I'm going to have a conditional statement here. So if the result value has a value other than 0, we will log an error in the log file and throw an exception. And of course, make sure you imported the log class, which is a facade. But if the command executes successfully, we just return the file name of the gzip so we can output this in our notification banner, which we will do in a minute. And of course, let's not forget to catch an exception if it were to occur. After this, let's go back to the backup controller. In the backup function, we will execute the backup process here. So to make the process a lot more efficient, we are going to put the backup process in a queue job. Let's head over to the terminal and generate a job class. Let's call this processDB backup. In this class, we need to import the backup database trait we created earlier and use it here. Then, in the handle function of the job class, we will run the backup process here. Inside the try-catch block, we will call the perform backup function from the trait. And remember, this accepts the user ID as an argument. So we need to specify it here. In the constructor method, let's declare the user ID as a public property and supply the user ID to the perform backup function. Now, back to the backup controller. Let's grab the ID of the currently authenticated user, then dispatch the job we just created, and supply the user ID as an argument. Okay, before we test this out, let's not forget to run a queue worker. Now back to the browser, let's test this out. When I hit the backup button and went back to the terminal, you can see here that the queue worker is processing the job in the background. Then you will see a warning saying that using a password in the command line can be insecure. So when you're executing a command like this, do not hardcode your password in the command script or in your code. Laravel already sets a secure convention by specifying our sensitive configurations and details in the environment file. So you don't have to worry about this. And then as you can see, the backup process is done. So let's check this out. Back to the code editor. Let's see if the compressed database backup is in our storage directory. And yes, it's here. Actually, there are 3 gzip files here since this is from the test backup from the preview at the beginning of the video. Let's delete all these 3 for now, and let's test this again. Hit the backup button. In the terminal, the process is complete. And there's the backup file. Good, it's working. Now, using a queue to handle backup process and streaming the output directly to gzip does help mitigate some concerns related to PHP's max execution time and memory usage. But it's important to understand the implications fully. When you dispatch a job to a queue, it runs independently of the typical web request response lifecycle. This means that PHP's usual max execution time setting, which affects how long the script can run, doesn't apply in the same way it does for web requests. Instead of the standard max execution time, the queue workers have their own timeout settings. You can control how long a job is allowed to run using the timeout option when starting a queue worker. The default timeout for a queue worker in Laravel is about 60 seconds. So if a job exceeds the worker's timeout, it might be killed. So you still need to ensure that the timeout setting is appropriate for the length of time your backup might take. So to avoid this, in the process dbBackup job class, we can define a public timeout property and specify how long the queue worker is to process this job. Let's set this to 300 seconds, which is about 5 minutes. Now, one advantage of doing it this way is that the 5-minute timeout is only applicable to this particular job only. So if you have multiple jobs running at the same time, the timeout setting for those jobs won't be affected. Since the backup process can take a while compared to other jobs, it is very helpful that we can specify a different timeout setting for this job, apart from other jobs in the background. Okay, let's continue. So next, let's quickly load all the backups in the table from the front end. So here in the backup database component, I'll put this in the useEffect hook. I'll make a request to the get backups endpoint, and when it succeeds, I'll put the response data into the backups state. This is the state up here, which is an array, and since I'm using TypeScript, I just made a simple interface here to define different types for the properties. Then let's declare the route to the web.php file, and this will just simply return all the initiated backups by the user. I'm not going to paginate this for this example to make it simple, but you can do that if you want. Now in the front end, what this will do is just load the backup records in a simple table down below, right here. Okay, so let's try this. Let's go back to the browser, and right away, as you can see, it loads the 2 recent backups we did earlier. However, let's make the timestamp a little more human readable. We can generate a class for this. In the terminal, let's make a cast class, say human readable time. So here inside the cast directory, under the app directory, in the get function, let's use the carbon package to manipulate the date value to give us some human readable time format. Now, in order to use this, in the database backup model, we can create a protected casts attribute and use this on both the created and the updated fields. Make sure that the human readable time class is imported. Now, when I come back to the browser and refresh the page, as you can see, the timestamp is now more readable. And let me adjust the width of the parent container first so that the items are not so squished together. Okay, that looks good. Now, let's make our implementation a little more interesting by adding a real-time notification when the backup is finished. For this, we will use Laravel Reverb for this functionality. Fortunately, Reverb is very easy to implement. And by the way, I have a couple of videos regarding Laravel Reverb, and I will link some of them in the description section. Head over to Laravel's official docs about Reverb for the installation guidelines, which is very easy. After the installation, you should have these variables in your env file. So next, let's make an event class so we can broadcast an event to our front end. Let's name this backup completed. Then let's open that class. And we need to implement the should broadcast interface first on this class so we can broadcast this event to our front end. Next, in the broadcast on function, we need to specify the channel where we want to broadcast. So let's say the backup channel. Now we need to provide the ID of the currently authenticated user to broadcast this event to the user who initiated the backup. So here in the constructor method, let's provide the ID of the user, as well as the message, and the file name of the backup file. Then, back here, via string interpolation, let's insert the ID of the user here. Next, make sure that you set the channels route here in the channels.php file. I have already set up mine, so this is good to go. Now, in order for our app to receive the real-time notification from the backend, we need to broadcast the event from our job class, where we call the backup process. So here, use the broadcast helper function, then instantiate the event class. Then as the first argument, supply the user ID, then the message of the notification, and the file name of the backup. Now, there's an error here. The expected type is string, but void is found. Most likely, this is due to the annotations in the comment from our backup function. Let's just quickly check this. In the perform backup function, yes, we have some annotations here in the comment. Let's quickly remove that. Okay, the error is gone. In the catch block, we will also broadcast a notification when an error has occurred. Next, we need to anticipate the broadcasted event in our frontend. I chose to put the event listener in the authenticated layout component, which is a parent component and encapsulates all the other components you made. This means we can receive the notification wherever we are in the application, whether we are in the dashboard, the profile page, or wherever, except the login page, of course, because that means we are not logged in if we're at the login page, and some other pages that we are not authenticated. So here in the useEffect hook, I will say echo.private, then specify the channel we should listen to and concatenate the user's ID. Then, in the listen method, specify the name of the event class we created, which is backup completed, exactly as it is spelled. The listen function can accept a second argument, which is the event payload that the broadcaster emitted from the backend. Since I'm using TypeScript, I need to specify the type of the event, which is declared up here. I have an interface right here. Then after this, we will show the notification toaster component and set the message for the notification. Like I said, I'm using TypeScript here, so the TypeScript compiler is complaining that it doesn't know the proper type for this echo class. So let's fix this right away. I will create a variable called echo instance. Then just set this to any for now. If you're not using TypeScript, you don't have to do this. Then let's set this to echo instance. Now down here is the custom toaster component I made. It's just a simple notification dialog. So let's test this. Head over to the terminal and start the Reverb server. Also, make sure that the queue worker is running. In the browser, I will hit the backup button and let's see if this works. In the terminal, you can see the queue worker is processing a job. The process has been completed and the backup completed event has been fired. If you check Reverb, you can see the backup completed event has been fired and the message was received on the front end. In the browser, you can see our notification here. Right now, I need to refresh the page to show the new backup in the table, but I will leave that for you to figure out if you want to try it yourself. I'm pretty sure you can do it. And while you're at it, maybe you can also disable this button while the backup is in progress. But again, I'll leave that to you as an assignment. So let's test this one more time by clicking the backup button. And while the backup is in progress, let's switch to a different page, say the dashboard, just to check if we will receive the notification on different pages. And yes, we can receive the notification on different pages as well. And lastly, let's quickly add the functionality to download and delete the backups here. Let's start with deleting a backup. We have a button here with a delete backup on click event. Let's make a request to the delete backup endpoint. And we need to supply the ID of the backup in the database record and the path where the backup file is located, so we can unlink the file later. After a successful operation, we'll simply remove the deleted item from the table by filtering out from the current array of backups. Of course, we need to register this route in the web.php file. We'll point this endpoint to the delete backup method of the backup controller. In the controller, we need to create that function and delete the record from the database. Deleting the actual UZIP file is easy. We can use the unlink function and specify the file's location. Now let's test this. In the browser, let's delete this one by one. I think this first one doesn't exist because we manually deleted it a while ago. If we check the storage directory where our backups are located, you can see there are no more files here. I'll just manually reset the database backups table so we can start fresh. Okay, back to the browser, refresh the page. So let's test this again by backing up the database. Okay, it's successful. Now go back to the system maintenance page. And here's the database backup, as you can see. Let's try to delete this. Okay, it's gone. And the file is gone as well. Good. Now the final step is to give this the ability to download the file, which is very simple. In the download function, we'll simply call a JavaScript function here, say window.location.href, and specify a route, like download backup, and concatenate the path where this backup is located. Again, the download button is down here, so let's go to the web.php file to register the route. Here's the route declaration to download the file. We'll use the download function that is built into the response method provided by Laravel. And just specify where the file is located. Okay, finally, let's test this. Back to the browser, hit the download button, and there you go. The download is completed. If we go to the download location, there's the file. Let's test this again. Refresh the page for the new record to appear. Hit the download button again. Good, it's working fine. So let's try to delete this too. And let's check the storage directory. Yes, they are deleted as well. Okay, so that concludes our mini project for today. This little demo is actually inspired by some of my past projects because some of my clients requested this functionality a couple of years ago, so I thought I'd make a little example today. Of course, there's a lot more you can do to make this even better, but I think this will suffice for now. That's it guys. If you like this video or find it useful, kindly hit the like button, and if you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing so you can be notified when I publish new video like this one. Thank you for watching and see you next time.